Hi, thanks for coming today. I'm Wendy Edwards, Visual Art Department. I want to thank a few people. Christine, Winnie, and Jane all helped bring this lecture to fruition today. Jane Dixon received her BA at Harvard University in 1976 and a studio diploma from the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston in another year, but I don't have the correct year. And who for the last 2 decades has been exhibiting her paintings, drawings, and prints in museums and galleries, such as the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney, the Brooklyn Museum, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Karamay Museum in Xinjiang, China, and most recently, the National Portrait Gallery at the Smithsonian. Fortunately, last summer, I was able to travel to China with Jane, and that was the first time I met her. So we're very familiar with that northern Xinjiang province. Since the 1980s, starting at Times Square, she has chronicled and memorialized scenes of life in America, from the glittering spectacles of Las Vegas casinos and demolition derbies to the monotony of strip malls, highways, and suburban sprawl. Dixon is known for her dark, iconic images that examine the constructed world and its psychological freight, the social structuring of desire and its disruption by the uncanny. Deploying unusual materials such as astroturf, vinyl, sandpaper, felt, and carpet, which resonate with their particular subject, Dixon's paintings express her fascination with the power of artificial light, as well as surreal and sexually transgressive environments. Often depicting the spectacle in her work, her subjects include Times Square, where she lived and or worked from 1978 to 2008, the carnivals, suburban homes and highways, among others. In addition to her large body of paintings, the artist organized Messages to the Public, a public art fund series which presented monthly artists' projects created for Spectators or Spectacolors One Times Square billboard. In her most recent contribution to Times Square, Dixon designed 67 mosaics of New Year's Eve revelers that were installed within the Port Authority 42nd Street and Times Square subway station and commissioned by the Metropolitan Transit Authority. Her recent exhibit, All That Is Solid, Melts into Air at James Fuentes Gallery, New York, which closed less than 2 weeks ago, which I was happy to be able to see, included works spanning from the early 80s to the present, each offering an important document of New York City. I want to share with you a beautiful new book titled Jane Dixon in Times Square, and she can tell you a little bit about it. This just came out in November or December. Please help me welcome Jane Dixon.
Come on down. I promise I won't bite you. Yeah, humor me. That way, we're more of a group instead of a scatter. So like you guys, I went to an Ivy League school and got a well-rounded education, which I feel like, prepared me to live in Times Square. Or at least, prepared me to have a lot of knowledge about things that I ended up bringing into my artwork. So I commend you all for coming here. I'm going to start by showing you a quick bit of a video that an acquaintance of mine made, because it's sort of fun, of my show that ended last week. And then then I'll talk to you. Okay, so see if that works. What did I just do wrong? I don't know how to do this. I'm going to do it this way. Okay, we want to hurry past these guys.
And she tripped and fell, and I guess she died.
He's giving a narration.
So some things never change. Jane really has been rediscovered, and well, I remember when I first moved to New York, I was living not that far away from Times Square, and sometimes in the evenings, if I was suffering from painter's block, I would go down and catch a movie or just check out the action. And about this same time, Jane and her husband Charlie, and I think Charlie's brother John Ahern, were involved with a group called Collab, and they were beginning to organize something that became the Times Square Show. And they went into a former massage parlor and had a huge group show, and I remember walking down there one sunny afternoon and going inside, and they had a little part of the show where they had blackboards, and they asked people to come in and make some sketches, and I ran in and did some quick drawings on the blackboard, and they ended up being photographed by the reviewers for, I believe it was Art in America, so that was my first exposure. This piece is titled Nathan's 43rd Street. It's 1984 to 86, oil and canvas, 66 by 78. I think Jane also has done a great job with this technique of kind of painting on a nubby black ground, and then a lot of this is oil stick kind of scumbled in on top. But I think she's done a great job of like selecting very nice, simple subjects that she can boil down and really give you a simple, bold image. It's called Bus Stop Boy 2 1984, oil stick on canvas. And I think Jane had a studio down there around Times Square, and there was a little group of other artists that were also working there. And, well, as I said, the Times Square show was a real harbinger of a whole thing that ended up happening in the 80s with the the beginning of the East Village scene.
Okay, that'll be enough of that one. I just thought it was sort of interesting the way it sort of makes me seasick, but it's also interesting to see the way he gets into the texture in a way that with my slides, you don't see it so much. And also, I barely know this guy, Lorne Monk, but he now, if you Google him, he does these for millions of art shows. He goes in and he just starts running his camera as he's walking around, and he's talking while he's looking at the work, and then he posts them. So if you miss somebody's show, you can always, a show you want to see, you can go look at them. So I'm always very interested in community and sharing, and so I hardly know Lorne, but he's now another part of my community, and through him, this whole other. I feel like art is part of a dialogue, and it's not a series of monologues, which sometimes we forget and are like, it's all about me. I don't want to hear about you. It's just about me. Okay, so next, so as he said, and actually Wendy also said, when I first came to New York out of college, I started working as an animator to support my painting habit, and then I got a job on the first computer billboard. So now we're going to go on to, how do I go on to this next thing? Yes. I try to do these different every time, so I'm trying the video thing. Okay. So this is a piece of a video that my husband Charlie made. We need to turn the sound up on this. And this was my old studio in the 80s in Times Square.
Subliminal seducer. I will never dance. I stand better luck next time.
When I first came to New York, I got a job working on this computer light board in Times Square, the night shift on weekends, where I was creating images that were basically neon images. They were animated moving ones, but they were creating lights on a dark field. And even though when I took that job, I thought, oh, it's totally separate from my painting. It won't influence it at all. When I went home, I kept finding myself painting canvases black because I wanted to recreate that power of light glowing out of darkness. And working the night shift on the weekends in Times Square, I was looking at all this neon. And then we moved there, and I just felt like this is my world. I have to look at it and deal with it and think about it.
That's all, 'cause you mad.
You don't own me. I'm not just one of your many toys. You don't own me. Don't say I can't go with other boys. And don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to say. And please, when I go out with you, don't put me on display.
This strip club, Peepland, was closed at this point, and I got invited to do an installation in it. And a friend of mine who was stripping her way through her master's in Columbia posed for this shoot.
6:30 live, 6:30 live.
One summer night, it's probably 4 a.m., I got woken up by this guy screaming under my window, and he's screaming, "Cry, go on, cry, you bitch, you crybaby bitch. Don't want no fucking crybabies, bitch. Got no time for no crybabies, bitch. Cry, go on, cry forever, you bitch, you crybaby, you crybaby bitch." And I couldn't believe this guy had just like summed up my life. It seems like for a woman, you're either too soft or too hard, too tough or too sensitive. You complain, you're a crybaby. You fight, you're a bitch.
I think we'll stop here. We already saw this painting. Yeah, I think we've seen enough. All right. So how do we go to the next part? Okay, now we're gonna go on. So now I'm, okay. So this is part of a mosaic that I did for the MTA. If you come to New York, there's a series of figures of New Year's Eve revelers that goes from Port Authority to Times Square. And under, it's the 41st Street Passageway, and underneath the 123 train, there's a whole big area. And the ones by Port Authority are running because they're late and they're trying to get there. And the ones under 7th Avenue are, yay, it's New Year's Eve. They're jumping up and down. So that's this. And I'm going to link this all together. So my early work, I was very lonely. I wasn't yet, married or having a family. And I was picking these lonely figures. And like I said a little bit in the video, I was working on the first digital light board in Times Square, the night shift on weekends, because I thought I don't want it to interrupt my painting studio time, so I'll work on nights and weekends. So I would get there in like 3 o'clock, and the salespeople would tell me what ads I had to do, and then by 5, everyone would leave because somebody needed to be keeping the sign going in case it crashed. So I would program by myself, and I think one of the key things to being an artist, continuing an artist practice, is that you like being alone, because there's a lot of alone time usually. And, I was like, great, everybody's going home, nobody's gonna bother me. So when I would take breaks, I'd look out the window and there was a lot of action. And then, as I said in the video, my husband, I moved in with my boyfriend to this ridiculous tiny space, and then I saw there were a lot of loft for rent signs on 43rd Street, and we moved into that loft. And I was like, whoa, I better deal with all this stuff I'm seeing here. But there have been other parts of my work, like the New Year's Eve revelers, that are more more joyous more recently. As a young person, I really wallowed in angst, and then as I got older and really hard stuff happened, suddenly I was like, let's look for the brighter side. Okay, so how do I go to the next one? What am I doing wrong here? Okay, next. I'm going to do it this way. So I think I started by saying this. I'm really interested in art as community and art as dialogue. And when I first came to New York, even in college, I befriended people that seemed to have good energy, and some of them, like the photographer Nan Golden, who's did the portrait of me on the cover of my book, was my friend in Boston, and then I saw her again in New York. I joined this group of people that were starting an artist organization called Collaborative Projects, and this was the late 70s. It was the tail end of minimalism. We were all interested in issue-based art, figurative art. Nobody was interested in showing that. So we started making our own shows in various people's lofts and whatever. And then at one point, we organized a show we called the Times Square Show, and somebody knew somebody who knew the Durst organization and introduced, and we convinced them to let us use an empty massage parlor for the month. And because I was already working in Times Square, I had already started doing drawings of 3-card Monty. So when people were like, well, what should the poster be? I was like, how about this? And the drawing was mine, but then it was a collaboration. My then boyfriend, now husband, was interested in silk screening, so he printed it and made them all these crazy colors. So we did that, and then because I was working on the billboard, and the Times Square show would have been up in the upper right there on Broadway. So this is one Times Square where the ball drops on New Year's Eve. And the first couple years I was there, I ran the countdown at New Year's Eve. It was very cool, right? You had to look out. There was a little peep window right below the sign where you could look out and see the whole crowd counting down. So I convinced my boss that he should let me run an animated ad for the show, and because I was programming the time on the sign, I think this ran every half an hour for a month. So it was a 30-second animation. I'm not going to show that to you, but the hands, it started with the 3 cards, and the hands keep coming together and then opening to reveal more text. And then as part of that, I always thought of collaborative projects, but I think actually all of art is kind of like stone soup. It's like nobody has anything, but then everyone's like, oh, but I do have. In my case, I was like, well, I work at this weird sign. So in the process of getting the Times Square show going, Walter Robinson, who's a wonderful artist, if you don't know him, said, oh, I'm going to go ask the people at the Public Art Fund if they'll give us money. Jane, come with me. I was like, never heard of the Public Art Fund, but sure. So we went and told them what we were doing, and she said, we can't give you money for something 3 weeks from now. We budget by the year. But this sign thing seems amazing. She said, if you would help me get access to that sign, I can get money to do an artist series. So I talked to Jenny later, after the Times Square show was over, and said, well, I'm willing to persuade my boss to let me do a series if you let me pick the artists for the first year, because in the Times Square show, I've gotten to know all these fantastic young artists that no one's heard of yet, like Jenny Holzer was making art on paper cups. I introduced her to lights. Keith Haring was still in school, but I thought, whose work is simple enough to work on this sign? This line work of Keith's will work. David Hammonds was in the first season. The graffiti artist Crash. Edgar Heap of Birds, who's a really interesting Native American artist who's now beginning to get recognized, and Whitney's doing stuff with him. So I said, I don't want to be called the curator because I also want to put my work in it. So I started this series and I curated it the first year and programmed it. So I got to work with people who were my friends instead of like famous old, 40-year-old artists or something. And that project ran for, I think, 8 years till this billboard came down, and then it's continued in other forms on other billboards in Times Square till today. So this was the first digital art project. And just to step back for a second, I got the job through an ad in the New York Times that said, help wanted, artist willing to learn computers. Because in '78, there were no computer art programs in any schools yet. So the people that hired me said, we've figured out that we cannot teach aesthetics to a computer person. So we need to teach computer skills to some artists. And this was before there were even hard drives. So I was in at the stone age of computers. But after like 4 years, my rest of my group there went out to LA to start a special effects company, and they invited me to come with them. But I also started doing my first painting shows, and I was like, 21st century technology, 19th century technology. I'm going back in time. So I didn't follow up with a career in animation, or at least in computers. Okay, now what do I do here? Let's do the next one. So I loved, in continuing my little, secret outlaw thing, I persuaded, in those days, the sign was considered public broadcasting. So they had a license and they had to do a certain amount of public programming. So I said, Susan Pitt had been my teacher at Harvard, and then I did cell painting for her when I first came to New York, and then she was showing this at the Whitney. So I did an animated ad that ran on the Whitney. I also did, let's see if I have another one here. I can't remember what I've put into this. No. I don't have another one. Anyway, I did various ones sneakily that one ran for a month and my boss knew about it. So I also got involved with this group called Top Stories, Ann Turin was inviting women artists to do books, and some of these people you may have heard of. There's Jenny Holzer again, Kathy Acker was a really crazy woman writer, Laurie Anderson. And I feel like this was my first art as an adult, not student art. I decided I'm only going to make art about things I actually know something about now. And I thought, well, what do I know about? Oh, my friends and I always seem to talk about is boyfriend troubles. So I'll make a zine. I did a series of these drawings of how to, the struggles of living with somebody. And then I showed it to Lynn Tillman, who's gone on to become a well-known art critic and author. But at this point, I knew she was a writer, but she hadn't published anything yet. And I was like, Lynn, can you write something to go with these images? So she did, and it became a book, a mini book. But also in the Times Square show, which I was talking about, I put the original monoprints. I hadn't made the book yet. I curated the hallway and I put them, and you can see there, I put clear plastic over them, and there's duct tape around it. It was very sophisticated. And also, I don't have a good photo of it. A friend and I were organizing the stairs, and she was painting these columns, and in walked this guy who turned out to be David Hammonds, and he looks around, then he went back outside. This was on the Times Square show was on 41st Street. And he comes back with a bag of Night Train bottles. And if you don't know, anyone ever hear of Night Train? It was wino liquor. It was like the cheapest booze you could buy. So he went and picked up the empty Night Train bottles. They were all green on 41st Street, because this is near Port Authority. Brought them back, put them in a paper bag, and stomped on them. So he had broken glass, and then he sprinkled it down the whole staircase. And that was his piece. And I'm like, David, I'm trying to work here. You can't just leave glass all over the stairs. And he, you know, David Hems is a big trickster. So he kind of like looked at me like, honey, if you're in Times Square, deal with it. But he grudgingly swept his glass to one side. So we still had a carpet of glass for the whole, you know, I think he thought, oh, you white kids, you think you're so down, you know, deal with broken bottles. But we're still friends. He introduces me as his girlfriend that he never dated. And the one on the left is a Xerox of a print that I painted on, and then I also had it installed in the upstairs of the Times Square show. And the poster on the right, I put them together because they're the same color. But it's of a poster of a show that the artist Days, who's another street artist, curated in '97 and then made a poster, and it's Martin Wong, Crash, John Ahern, Jenny Holzer, me. I had just broken my hand, and suddenly when I got my cast off, all I wanted to do was, suddenly hands seemed really important and interesting, and I did these giant carpet arms. So that's my hand, and then Days and Andrew Castrucci. So again, this was like a sort of stone soup thing. Days was trying to get this Avanti Gallery to give him a show, and they were like, well, we don't know who you are. And he was like, well, what if I do a group show and I bring all these cool friends? And they were like, yeah. And then I ended up working with that gallery for a few years. So and I did, during the Times Square show, I started doing a series of monoprints of pickup lines that I was getting. As a young woman in the city, you know, you get a lot of unwanted attention. And I called the book, Hey Honey, Want a Lift? And the one on the right is the Mud Club. So my friend Joe Lewis one day said, oh, I'm going to start a press. You want to do a book? And I was like, sure, I have this whole series, Hey Honey, Want a Lift? So it was the 4 books. One was mine, one was Keith Haring, one was Tom Modernus, and the last one was Kara Perlman. People now seem very nostalgic for the 80s, and the one thing I can say about that period was things were not professionalized as they are now. So people could just go, oh, I think I'll make a book, or I think I'll start a gallery, and a few of those things still are going on today. Many of them failed, but things didn't cost that much, and there wasn't a lot of competition, which made it easier. And then these ones of Hey Honey, Want a Lift came back. I did an installation at Spring Break 2 years ago in this high-rise that's also on the corner of 43rd and Times Square. So we're still in a 2-block radius. But these were on garbage bags, and I had been making mirrored logos from a band thread. There was a club, an indie club in Bushwick that my son was involved in, and he and his friends had lots of weird bands, and they were always making funny band names, and then I made the logos and cut them out. First, the one on the right is at this club in Bushwick, which is no more, and then in that installation in Spring Break. And then I've gone back here to Fashion Moda was another collab. Outgrowth, some of my friends started a space in the South Bronx in the 70s, and I did an installation of a labyrinth there in 1980, and I collaborated with Crash and Knock, who are 2 early graffiti legends, and they painted the facade, and it was a really historic show. And I guess I want to loop back for a second to the part of that video that you saw. Okay, this is what it looked like inside this cardboard labyrinth. I wanted to do a show that the kids in the neighborhood would find exciting, and I thought, I'm new to the city, and it seems like a crazy maze to me, so I'm going to make a cardboard maze they can run around. And I did a really nice video of it, but I thought maybe enough videos. The early video that you saw at Times Square, the other thing I'm going to say about it is that have any of you seen a TV show called The Deuce? It's an HBO show. Well, they're filming the 3rd season, and they got very excited about my book because the video that Charlie shot in Times Square, and that this season is going to be 84, 85. It stars James Franco. Probably heard of him. So they are copying, they invited me to the art director's office, and they had Xeroxed every photo in my book, and they had them all up, and they're like, we're remaking this corner here and this there, and they're going to put up it, because in the 80s, friends of mine were working in a bar, famous bar there, and that's the bar that the story takes place in. The person that wrote the story that The Deuce is based on is somebody that I knew. And so the first 2 seasons were before my time, but this season they're going to have my work in it. And so anyway, I've been on the set photographing James Franco. I thought of sneaking a photo in, but I'm not allowed to show them yet till it's been on TV. So why am I telling you so much about the 80s? Because it's around a lot. Now, this is Crash. He now is an international street art star. He makes tons of money and does collaborations with Gucci and whatever. And he, he has always said, well, Jane, you introduced me to Fashion Moda when I was in high school, and you treated me like a real artist, not as like a kid. And so I owe it, you started me, and I want to do a similar thing. And I'm going to start a not-for-profit art space also in the neighborhood, which he still lives in. So he has this space, and he said, I want to remake City Maze, but now with my boys, the Tats Crew. So that's what we were doing 2 summers ago, and it was really fun. And we were going to sell all the separate pieces of cardboard for a benefit, but then his basement flooded and they got wrecked. So we didn't do that, but maybe we will again. So these are pieces. So it was new graffiti by the Tats Crew, but then also photo stats, like in the middle, that's a painting. It's a photo stat of a painting of mine, and over on the right you see the Gorilla Girls, and there's pieces by Anton van Dalen and Jenny Holzer. And so I got friends of mine from the 80s, and down at the very bottom there's a piece of the rat that Christy Rupp did, these rats all over. So it was like redoing 80s work and then new work, which was a ton of fun. And I think we're almost to the end. Okay. I also, all these years, as Wendy said, I've worked on weird materials. This is textured vinyl wall covering that I got in a surplus place and did paintings on. And this is AstroTurf. This painting is owned by the Museum at American University. I always find parking lots scary places. And I did this one when there was a guy who was driving around with a kid in the trunk of the car, and they were shooting people in Washington. So it was very weird that it now lives in Washington. I find that this happens very often, that what I'm thinking about when I make a painting, the people who relate to it pick up on it, even if there's nothing that says. Actually, it's a strip mall in LA. It's not in DC, but it has moved to DC where this shootings were. I also mostly make paintings of things I'm afraid of, and even things that are cheerful, like New Year's Eve. I actually am totally afraid of huge crowds. So painting for me, besides commenting on the world and observing it, is a way to face my fears and get over them. Motel. I love this motel. It's it's in Westchester, or was, and it's like, the fake castle crenellation at the top. It's so tacky. it moved to California, that painting. And then I did a whole series of highways on AstroTurf. This is a tunnel. I think this is the one that the Whitney just acquired this year. And I started these after 9/11 when I did a whole series of bridges and tunnels, because after 9/11, every time I had to leave the island, I'd think, well, would I rather die in the tunnel or on the bridge? You know, I started getting scared of them. So it's like, okay, you're scared of them. Take pictures, paint them. You can get over this. And this painting also got acquired by the Whitney. And again, when I showed this painting first in the early 80s, it's a really early painting, 2 people wanted to buy it. And I had never sold anything before, and I couldn't figure out how to pick which one to sell it to. So, because I couldn't figure out how to say no to one person, so I told them both it wasn't for sale. And in my head, to make an excuse for that, I said, I'm saving it for the Whitney. And then, holy shit, they acquired it last year. So, you know, you can purposefully think things. They don't always happen, and they don't happen right away, but if you think things, sometimes they happen. And that may be the end. Okay, now we're at the end. When I got to do this project, it was right after the London bombing, so just going in the subway was scary. So I said, I'm going to do New Year's Eve Revelers, which I had done very dark ones in the 90s. And the other part of it was that I had been very sick with cancer, and I had gotten over it, and so I was like, yes. So I said, no, I'm going to do cheerful New Year's Eve Revelers. These are my 2 kids who are grown-ups. And I thought the subway is already hard enough for commuters every day, and I wanted to bring some cheer to the commuter experience, and lots of people tell me that they're excited and send me emails with, you know, their selfie in front of them. So if any of you go to the subway and you take a selfie, send it to me. Okay, I'm ready to take questions. Anybody have a question? I can just keep talking if you don't. You're speechless. 'Cause I'm too rambly, maybe. Yes. David.
Jane, tell us about the mosaics, how you went ahead and did that. Did you have to like chip out the tiles that were already on the wall? Were you there doing it right on the spot, or did you make them and then have them installed?
I have a great video of that. Good question, David. Thank you. And I'm going to give you a really long answer. First of all, because I had done this Spectacolor project with the Public Art Fund in the early 80s, they then put me on the panel of I was the artist on their selection panel, and who else was on their selection panel but the woman that ran Arts for Transit, and Gary Garles, who's now at SF MoMA, he's the curator. So I was in with these people, and over time I got to know Sandra, so that when they did a series of posters of different stations in the subway, and when it was time for Times Square, she was like, oh, well, I know this artist who does. So she hired me to do that, and as part of it, they got to keep the original drawing, and she liked the drawing, so she put it hangs across from her desk. So then fast forward 2 decades, and she was like, oh, now it's time to commission mosaics for Times Square. Who should I invite? Jane's pictures right in front of me. She couldn't invite one person, but of the 5 people she invited to make proposals, I was one of them. And I made a proposal, which was really, I was doing circuses at that point, and I did trapeze artists. It was not a great proposal. But then they forgot about it, because the person who was in charge of that, because they're doing many stations, it's a huge operation. The person who was in charge of Times Square quit, and they forgot about it. So like 2 years later, I finally got up my nerve and called Sandra and said, you owe me a kill fee and I want my drawings back because you didn't ever, well, I said, first, did you ever pick somebody and just not tell the rest of us? She was like, oh, let me get back to you. And then she calls me back and goes, we're going to meet next week. You have to come in and pitch your idea. I was like, I don't even remember what my idea was. And I was having my first show at Marlboro Gallery that week. I was like, I'm really busy right now. Teaching 4 classes. I have this big show coming up. She's like, we can't change it. You have to come that morning. So I said, well, I got to come look at my drawings. I went and looked at my drawings. I went, all these people in trapeze artists, this is right after the London bombing. I thought they look like they're falling out of windows. It's terrible. No one will like this. And I suddenly went, I should have made it New Year's Eve Revelers, but I don't have time to draw this before then. So I called her up and said, I can't participate because I don't have time to do it. And she said, 2 of the original 5 people have dropped out. So there's only 3 of you. If you come in and just tell us what your idea is, you have a 33.33% chance of getting the commission. If you don't come in, you have a 0 chance. Just come in. So I went into this meeting, and I brought like some of my earlier paintings that were of New Year's Eve, but they were all very dark. And some of my newer paintings that were brighter, and I said, I'm going to do this subject, but with this color, and I just didn't have time to draw it. But as I walked in, I looked at the committee. It was all people that were friends of mine. I thought, okay, this is rigged in my favor, thank you. And they said, okay, we picked you, but you have to promise you will do the drawings now. I was like, honest, I will do the drawings right away. So I did. The mosaics were made in Italy. It's Murano glass from Venice. The MTA, you have to be in a union to touch anything there. They do not want amateurs chipping away and making things that fall off and kill pedestrians. So I drew it. I got to go to Venice and go, can you take a little off my friend's chin there? And, I did little tweaking, and then they spent like 6 months chipping and cementing in. Yes, none of the mosaics that the city of New York does are done by the artists. There's like 2 and they said there's 2 companies that are authorized to work in the subway, and you must pick between those 2. So thank you for that question, David. You had a question over here.
I have 2 questions. The first question is, Hello. Okay, I have 2 questions. The first question is, what is your advice to college-age artists? And the second question is, when do you think you found your voice as an artist?
I would say focus on things that you actually know something about, that you really have an experience with. Personally, that's worked for me. If you want to do something about famine in Africa, but you actually haven't been there, it's not going to be as profound as if it's something you're really experiencing. And my real top thing would be look around you. Who in this room is exciting, is doing lively ideas? And sometimes those exciting people are somewhat annoying, but they're energetic. And so you don't, it's very tempting to go, okay, you and me and her, we all agree with each other. We went to school together. We'll always say nice things to each other and tell each other that our work is great, and we just won't talk to any of those people that don't know how great we are. That's a bad thing to get into. You can get into your little bubble, and then you're very isolated. You want to talk to people who are doing things where you're like, that's art? That's crazy. And you go, I don't really understand that. Can you explain to me what you're doing? And then you get to explain to them why you think what you're doing is good. And I believe that art is a dialogue. And great art comes from batting ideas back and forth and arguing and going, no, that doesn't make sense to me. You convinced me why that's good. So getting out there and meeting people, and then also sharing ideas, inviting people you hardly know to participate if you're doing something, not being like, I'm going to be safe and me and my friend are going to do this magazine and we won't let anybody else in. So those are my great things to encourage you with.
Thank you.
Hi. I wanted to hear more about, I guess, your art within like a community context and how, I guess, like what is a memorable collaboration or like how, I guess how your art relates to community and collaboration and I guess who was going to your shows too? Was it like a for us by us type of thing? And like, I guess speak on the community aspect. I'd like to hear more about that.
Well, some community stuff was more organized than others. I like connecting people. So, for example, when early on Art News noticed my work and said, we're going to include you in this series of 10 young artists to watch. I was like, great. And they came and interviewed me and they said, we're going to send a photographer over to take your picture for the article. And I don't know why. I said, who's the photographer? And I never heard of the person. And I said, I have this friend named Nan Golden. You never heard of her. She had never done anything public yet. I said, can my friend take the photo? They're like, sure. So I got her first gig. She came over and took these photos of me in Times Square. And like when I was putting this book together, I was like, damn, I wish I had photos of myself in Times Square. Why didn't I? Because I'm generally camera shy. Somebody picks up a camera, I would step out of the frame. And the only photos I have of me in Times Square happen to be by Nan, and they happen to be friggin' fantastic because she's a great photographer. And she was so naive at the time that the Art Forum paid her something, and she gave me the box of the originals, and I still have them every now and then. I'm like, Nan, you want these back? Because if I print her photos, they're not worth anything, but if she would print them and sign one, they would be really valuable. So that was me reaching out because I thought her photos were interesting. And it was the same thing with the Spectacolor sign, and so I did it just sort of for fun, but then I got eventually the mosaic out of the connection because I had extended myself. And I do that as often as I can, reaching out. And as far as were the shows by us, for us, a little bit, but for one thing, some of the people in collaborative projects, and Walter Robinson was the main one. Walter was working as a writer, I think, for Art in America at that point. So he knew everybody, and he made sure people came. So, the reason the Times Square show was famous is because he brought all the writers. He brought Jeffrey Deitch, who had just come to New York and wasn't anybody yet, but... And actually, the article that Lauren refers to, Jeffrey Deitch wrote the review of the Times Square show, and it was the first thing he did in the art world. So when I gave a talk like this at MICA in Maryland, at the end, one student put her hand up and said, but how do you meet famous people? And my point is, none of the people I'm talking about were famous when I met them. But some of the people right here are going to do amazing things, and you want to connect. You don't have to go to their birthday party and be their best friend and be their child's godmother. You just are like, okay, well, we work together. The same as we went to China together last summer and met each other, and we're like, oh, you're an exciting person. I want to talk to you more, and we'll figure out things to do. So that's why Wendy invited me. And, You know, why I'm going to be happy to, and also I don't feel like it has to be like, okay, you're going to do this for me and I'm going to do it back for you. It's more like you put out good energy and energy comes to you, and it may not be exactly I do back for you what you did for me. It's just you put out good energy and it comes around. Okay? Mr. Good Energy, yes.
Willing to talk a little bit about what New York was like for you in the 80s versus what you think it's like now? I think there's a lot of people in this room that are interested about where they're going to try to set up and settle, and whether or not New York is a welcoming place or to have the opportunities that you talk about so much in your lecture.
Great question. New York is a totally different place than it was in the 80s. New York was bankrupt. Nobody wanted to come there. Places were incredibly cheap. My first studio, I was paying $150 a month, and I moved in with Charlie. His rent was $180 a month, so I was splitting that. That's how I could afford a separate studio. We shared a bathroom down the hall with Cindy Sherman, who lived across the hall from us. So that building was amazing. People who were going to be known later, but were not yet. It's not like that anymore, you know. My kids have lots of roommates. Even living in Bushwick, my poor son has like 7 roommates. I'm like, oh my God. And people are running just to keep the lights on. So it's not a great place for young artists unless you fall into some really, you know, if your parents live there and you've got a place that you can, you know, fall back on, or, you know, maybe you have a friend who's got an apartment and you got a job, but it's really hard. I think LA is better. And LA is a very active art scene. Lots of young people are going to Berlin. Lots of young people are going to Mexico City. They all have very vibrant, young, less expensive art scenes. And, New York is more like Paris these days, where people who live there, either they inherited an apartment or something. If you're like, I don't care, I'm going to try it anyway, good for you. Some people do, but it's not easy. The thing is, back in the 80s, it wasn't expensive, but there also wasn't very much. There was no infrastructure in the way that nowadays there's lots of these young residencies and programs for young artists. None of that existed. So, if you do your homework and you figure out, oh, I can get a studio at Shashama or some other residency, great, come to New York and, let it rip. But the stakes are just really high now. You have to figure out how you're going to bankroll it. Any other questions? I hear Austin is great too. I haven't really spent time there. But yes, a lot of you can, leave your bags at your parents' and apply for residencies and bounce around various exotic places for a year or two and then settle somewhere.
Well, thank you very much.